Hi everyone, welcome to our final session of CIL 532. This is session 9 about blended learning to support English learners. I'm going to walk through this session, show you everything that's involved, and then we'll jump into the slides. You're going to start session 9 by watching this video entitled What's Up with Blended Learning. Then you are going to read the readings for this session. The first one is about blended learning, and it's a more practical application for teachers and educators who are in the classroom. So there's a lot of tools and a lot of just practical tips and tricks and steps to blended learning if that's what you would like to move towards. This is blended learning tools, so there are a lot of tools here that will work with what we're going to talk about, but also will work with your final projects. And then this article, this is a blog entry from a teacher who has moved into using stations within blended learning. So part of the stations are blended, part of the stations are in person. So it's an interesting take on her experience moving towards this manner of instruction. All right, after you've done the readings, you are going to head on in and watch this video. You have the slides here that you can watch during the video and after the video. And then I'd like you to take some time to go through the blended learning pathway menu. And we are going to talk about this more at length in the slides, so I will leave it here right now. But this is what I'd like you to do after the slides, is make sure that you give yourself some time to look through all the resources in there. Once you've gone through all the slides and the pathway menu, the only assignment you have to complete this week is the course post-assessment, and this is worth 10 points, so 10% of your final grade. It just gives me a little bit of feedback on the parts of the class that you found most useful, most beneficial, so that I can make sure to include and highlight those in future iterations of this course. If you want to read more about blended learning or flipped learning, here are some extra articles and resources that you can take a look at. And then again, your only graded activity is the course post-evaluation. And after you finish that, then you are officially done with the course, and congratulations. That is, with the course module activities, you may still have clinicals or the final project to complete. So, with that being said, let's head on into the slides. So today we're going to be talking about blended learning, and we're going to start with defining blended learning. So if you had to define blended learning, how would you define that? Would it be the same as flipped learning? Would it be the same as hybrid learning? So often we see that these terms are used either separately with different definitions or kind of together with the same definition. And how we are going to define blended learning is more according to this model. So blended learning is that space in between that face-to-face learning in a classroom and virtual learning online. So we can see in this graphic how blended learning might look in a language learning experience. Sometimes the examples we see about blended learning lend themselves more to ELA or math or science or social studies or another content area. But if we're looking at blended learning from a language experience, what does that look like? Especially since language is something that needs to be used meaningfully to be acquired. So how does that work in an environment that is part face-to-face and part virtual? Let's take a look. So there are a couple models of blended learning, and if you click on this link, this image, you'll see a representation of blended learning. And I really like this graphic because it really, to me, makes it cleaner about where different kinds of blended learning fit along the spectrum of face-to-face and virtual. So I mentioned in the beginning when we looked at the hyperdoc about a rotation model. And a rotation model is really going to be a lot of what you'll see in traditional schools. So when we talk about blended learning, especially for today, we're going to be talking a little bit more of a rotational model. So maybe stations or a lab or a flipped classroom of some sort. And so if we take a look and focus really on those 4 versions of rotation model, you can see that the structure of the rotational model will go from more fixed to more student choice. So when we have this station rotation, that is really dictated by the teacher and where the students go and what they do when they are there. And then you get a little bit more removed. Flipped classroom is more onus on the student, and all the way to individual reaction, which the student is given an individualized playlist and they are moving to each station or modality on their own. So take some time to go through this document and read about the different types of blended learning. In this session today, what we're really going to focus on is more the tools and strategies we use within blended learning as opposed to the structures of blended learning. But I did want to give you some resources in case you are more interested in the nuts and bolts and structures of blended learning. Blended learning really requires a unique mindset, or perhaps a different mindset than brick and mortar teaching requires. And a lot of it is thinking beyond what our normal limitations are. So when we teach in schools, we're tied to the schedule, time, what's the grade level, who are the students, what's my physical space, what tools do I have access to that students can get their hands on. And blended learning really asks you to suspend some of those limitations and think beyond them. So now you aren't, what would happen if you weren't controlled by the bell and by the schedule and by, 30 to 40 minute chunks of time? What would happen if you weren't confined to one subject? If you could kind of mix subjects or mix grade levels as you'd like? What would it look like if you didn't have to think about working within a physical school building? What could learning look like if you opened it up outside into the world? And then what tools are available, thinking beyond the tool. So I'm not worried about just how to do, how can students use this tool? I'm thinking about, is this tool going to allow my students to access higher order thinking? And then thinking beyond the due date. We are, in schools are very regimented, and we like those due dates because we know, when material is going to come into us that needs to be assessed. But what if we thought beyond that due date? What if we thought and created something that was more flexible, where students could turn in things as they finished them or in any order they wanted to? And what new structures would I have to implement in order to make that happen, right? How do I make sure I'm not getting 1,000 assignments on the last day of something? How can I structure it so that students are intrinsically motivated to work at their own pace and turn in things as they're ready? It's with that questioning in mind and that mindset in mind that I designed this session. So this session, I'm going to kind of suspend my limitations of using the video and using slides, and I really have created a different experience for you that kind of is beyond that goes outside of those constraints. So how the rest of the session is going to work is I'm going to show you, I'm going to demo two tools. I'm going to show you some tweets that I found that as inspiration. And then I'm going to show you a pathway menu that you can use to kind of walk through setting up your own blended learning experience for students. So let's take a look at this first tool. The first tool I'm going to show you is called Now Comment, and you can find it at nowcomment.com. And what this website allows you to do is upload documents or text. So it can be anything from a PDF to an image to copy and pasted text from a website. And it allows you to share that text with students so that they can annotate and collaboratively annotate a document. So if you click on this link, it will take you to a version of the reading you were assigned today. So you were assigned to take a look at teaching, listening, and other literary skills through classroom station rotation by Tara Baldwin. So what I've done is I've taken the text and images and everything from there. I've uploaded that to nowcomment.com. And what it allows now is for me and for my students to make some comments. So you can go through, you've hopefully already read this, but I've modeled kind of how this looks. So what you can do is take a look at some of the tools you have up here that I think that I agree with. I'm going to click here and I'm going to say, let's say I really do believe that teaching listening is really important. So I'm going to highlight that. And so now I have highlighted this for my peers to see. I can also leave comments. So let's say I wanted to encourage people to leave comments. I can say leave any comments for your classmates to see, and I wanted to just highlight that sentence, not the paragraph or the whole document. And I can, if I wanted to expand on it, I could, but I don't really want to. So I'm going to click Start Conversation. And then you can see where I commented on things. So if we wanted to go through, we could go through and see all of my comments. And as you go through, you could go and say, oh, I'd like to reply to that, and reply to my comments. So this gives students just a more interactive and collaborative way to read documents and to go through and to take something that might be confined to a text or a website and put it in a location where it's more interactive and students can make comments, work on it on their own, but you can still see their thinking and see the group's thinking and where they are and get a gauge on that. So let's say in a blended learning experience, students could do this at home or in a certain station or independently in a classroom, and you could still have and know at a moment's notice kind of where the group is thinking and what they're thinking about, so that when you go to do whole group instruction or small group instruction, you already know where all the kids are and all the students are, what they're thinking. And it kind of saves you that check-in time that you would otherwise have to go through and say, well, what did you think about this? What about this part? What about that part? What did they, mean here? And you can kind of start that conversation online and then merge it into the brick and mortar classroom. This website has some other great features for teachers. You don't always have to upload your own content. They have some public documents on different topics, so you could always check there to see if what you want to read about has an article there that you could bring into the classroom, and it gives you more of a range of topics that you can bring into the classroom. The next tool we're going to look at is called Insert Learning, and for this tool, you do need a specific Chrome extension. So to find that, you would go to the Chrome Web Store and type in Insert Learning. And then this is what it looks like, and you would click Add to Chrome is what it will say for you. So once you click that, you will get a Chrome extension that looks like this little purple box that says CIL, and you're ready to go. So what Insert Learning does, it takes any website and makes it into an interactive learning activity. So again, I've taken this article that you were assigned and I've turned it into an Insert Learning experience. And so when you activate the Insert Learning extension, you will have the option to turn any website into one of these activities by clicking this little button up here. So you can see once you turn something, a website, into an activity, you'll get this toolbar on the side. And if you scroll down, you can see how this kind of works. What you're able to do with Insert Learning is you can take a website and insert videos, comments, support for your students, highlighting, and then give students a place for them to ask questions or respond to questions you've asked. So we can see that in this article, I've inserted a YouTube video on how to highlight in case you wanted some practice with how to highlight. We go down a little bit. I've inserted a little comment how this DICE activity could be adapted for any age or ELP level. I've also highlighted some parts of the story that I found interesting. You can change the highlighting color. I could also enter a comment, so like saying this is interesting. And then my comment is here with my highlights. You can also pose questions to your students. So I could say, how could you use ListenWise with your students? And then any student can respond to my question. And I think, yep, here we go. Did this leave you with any unanswered questions? You could also respond to that. You don't have to, but I'm just showing you the different functions in here. So it's very simple. If I had, if I wanted to ask a question right here, just click the paragraph that I want to attach it to. It also gives you some question stems so that you don't always have to type from scratch. So if I wanted to say, write one vocab word, find a vocab word and write a sentence, I could also assign it points if I wanted to. So that's the questioning. Same thing for if I'd like to insert a discussion or insert a sticky note. And what's nice is a sticky note, I can also insert a video into any part. So if I wanted to insert a sticky note and record myself reading this to students, I could. So that is a little bit about Insert Learning, and I've included some examples here for you that Insert Learning gives in their teacher guide. And so if you're interested, I encourage you to check those out. It's different ways to use Insert Learning with different content areas, different groups of students, different assignments. So here's one about sight words for younger students that you could use, or students who are newer to English. Here's how one teacher has used it to do read-alouds, which I thought was really great. So you could have students record videos of themselves reading certain passages. So every student could have the article, insert a sticky note, and record themselves reading it. So at the end of the activity, you would have videos of all your students reading, and you would have a reading sample for yourself and for your files. This is an example someone did about how to use it for a current event. And so they show you who and where were our blue highlights. Use green highlights for what and why, yellow highlights for 2 or more things that you have questions about. Then you see the question, or the question this teacher has posed. And then if you were to want to use that lesson, you could just copy the lesson for yourself and give it to and assign it to your own class. Finally, here's a bell ringer activity for students. So how can you use insert learning with different bell ringers? And then they give some examples here for practice. So those are some interesting things that you might want to check out if you find that tool interesting and think it's something you could use either with your students or in your final project. Okay. So one of the examples that they show in one of the activities they show is a lesson involving ListenWise. And I've included that link here to kind of show you that teachers' different reflective charts and how they structure blended learning in that class. So how she structures her blended learning, you can see the targets. So they do a KWL. This is a YouTube video. So how does she incorporate videos into her stations? Here's the ListenWise audio story. Their 4 corners activity, an Edpuzzle activity. Here's how she incorporates Flipgrid, other graphic organizers on slides. And then here's her 3, 2, 1 exit ticket. So I wanted to specifically highlight this example because it's really bringing together a lot of the tools you've learned in this course, or rather you've used in this course. So there's different graphic organizers on Google Slides. She's using YouTube videos and audiobooks. Again, graphic organizers, Edpuzzle, but also Flipgrid. And really you're seeing how all of these tools can come together to form a really cohesive lesson. And this is what you're going to be asked to do in your final project, is create a cohesive lesson like this. Not, it doesn't need to be, on the Terracotta Army or necessarily this in depth, but you can see how she's merging different tools to create a cohesive lesson that students who have different, strengths in different modalities will really be able to shine in one area or another. Okay. If you're interested in using ListenWise, I included YouTube video that walks you through how to use ListenWise because it's a really great tool, but I didn't want to spend a lot of time exploring it on our own. If it's something you think you're interested in or could use in your lesson, definitely check it out. And you could start by watching this YouTube video to get an idea. I wanted to connect what we learned about in the last session on using Twitter for professional development to kind of reflect on how could we grow our own knowledge of blended learning using what we're finding on Twitter. So I did a hashtag search for blended learning and I found some great things. So I wanted to show you just what's out there if you if you take the time to search through Twitter for some of the topics you're interested in. Here's a teacher using Edpuzzle with her English learners to teach about digraphs. So Edpuzzle doesn't have to be just about videos and talking, that ask comprehension questions. We could also use it to practice consonant sounds, vowel sounds, some of those oral language skills that our students need to practice. And you can probably see that when I did this search for hashtag blended learning, I also included English learners or EL in it. So I really wanted to focus on how are people defining blended learning with EL in their own classroom. So here's a teacher who had students create Flipgrid videos about what they wish their teacher knew. This is a teacher using ChatterPix to develop language acquisition. So she's using ChatterPix to help students practice their oral language, as we talked about in one of our videos. Here's ESL students drawing a map and typing directions to important locations around the school. So they're bringing in that technology, but also doing, face-to-face and on-the-ground learning to practice buildings in the or rooms in the school, locations in the school, directions, prepositions, all of the things that are involved in making and following directions. We also see a teacher using augmented reality, and this is something we haven't gone into because it's a pretty large topic that's really is a lot better in person to go over. But one of the tools this teacher is using is Erasma to create augmented reality lessons and supports for her students. Katie Gardner is a great EL teacher who uses a lot of instructional technology with her students, and she's a great person to follow on Twitter if you want some ideas. Here are other students making inferences and doing cause and effect relationships. Some are on the computer, you can see, and then some are doing their work in paper and pen. So you can see the blending of technology and analog techniques here. And then here's Katie Gardner again. Here she's showing how her students use Bunsey, which is a digital storytelling platform, so that she's having students learn about shapes and positional words. So you can see just a lot of examples if you go online and search blended learning in ELs or blended learning language acquisition. And it's a really great place to kind of harness some of those ideas for your project or to use with your students. So now we're going to move on to the final section of today. So for the final part of today's session, what you're going to do is head on over to the Blended Learning Pathway menu. And what this is a hyperdoc that takes you through creating a blended lesson. So why I thought this would be helpful and why I chose to do this for our last session is what I wanted you to have was more resources than you would even be able to handle. I wanted you to have so many resources that something would work for your setting, your students, your final project. Here's where we're going to find them. And I do want to give credit to my colleague at IRC, Michelle Yunong, because she is the driving force behind a lot of the resources and the beauty of this pathway menu. So she designed this. And she does a great full day workshop on blended learning if you're interested. This is just going to be a taste, but she does an incredible workshop on blended learning. So what you have here is you are able to explore more about blended learning. So if you want to take a deeper look at the rotational model, here's things you can watch. Here's things you can read. If you want to learn more about the playlist model, what you can watch, what you can read, the same for flipped classrooms, the learning space for blended learning, and different management systems. So more links to videos and articles than you could even know what to do with. But they're all here for you to just go through on your own at your own time. Once you've kind of gone through that and gotten all the background you want, you can start to apply it. So if you really think the rotation model speaks to you and it makes sense to you, try using this planning template. Option 2, you could talk through something with your colleague, right? It doesn't always have to be online. Sometimes our best resources are who's in our building. You can consider using Canva to make an infographic on how the model will work and how students will transition from station to station. And the same things with the playlist model, a flipped classroom, learning space, management systems, and content platforms. So all different ways you can do it. So here's one option you can do for all these models. There's a second option you can do to think through all these models, and a third one you can do to think through all these models. If we continue, you can see more tools here. So now that you kind of have your models selected, you can think like, all right, well, what tools do I know or what tools do I need to really create something that's well structured and great for students? And then so that this is where the Transform Your Tech Toolbox comes into play. Here are a lot of different tools. So tool categories, specific tools within that category, and what would your content of language objective look like with that tool? These are just examples. It doesn't mean that this is the only content and language objective pair that could work with all of these, but it's a sample that you could use. So we have polling tools that support conversation, infographic designing platforms, different collaborative tools, different arts-inspired outputs, multimedia, mind maps, level text, and vocab, responding through an avatar, creative writing. These are menus of different tools that other people have created for you to peruse at your own leisure. If you're looking for something and something specific, like I need something to have my kids respond back with what they know in a visual manner, but I don't want to use Canva, I don't want to use PictoChart, and I don't want to use Google Drawing. What's available? Check some of these menus. You will find something. If you keep going, you will see these are lists of mentor hyperdocs. So I've been referencing hyperdocs. Hyperdocs are the way I like to put together these sessions. I put together my workshops in hyperdocs. I really like how it just kind of ties everything together and everything can be found in one place, all your links and resources. So these are mentor hyperdocs. If you're looking for hyperdoc that includes more substitution, here it is. Hyperdoc that highlights augmentation and shows how to use tech to augment. Here are modification hyperdocs and hyperdocs that use technology to redefine tasks. So great topics. You also might come across one or two new tools here. These are hyperdoc templates that you can make a copy of and then use to structure and package your final lesson. That's more than okay. It's definitely appropriate. You don't have to, but it's an option. So now that we see everything that's in here, I'm going to kind of explain, head back over to our pathway menu. Here's what I'd like you to do with the pathway menu. Number one, nothing in here is required and nothing in here will be graded. Nothing in here will affect your grade. This is just solely for your own edification, for your learning. Look at what you want to look at. Practice what you want to practice. Explore the tools that you think look interesting. This is all about what makes sense for you and your students in your job or perhaps for your final project. I really wanted to make this last session flexible for you and full of tools so that you really walk away with everything you'll need to complete your final project. Hopefully that makes sense to you. You feel comfortable with that. That is the end of today's slides. Think about what you can use for your final project. Think about what you can model things off of. I hope you found this session and the whole course really beneficial for you and for supporting your English learners as they develop language and acquire content. I've really enjoyed talking with all of you these past weeks and reading your work, and I'm excited to see all of the projects you turn in. So if you have any questions, always contact me, but otherwise, good luck.